Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Bizzy. I hope you enjoyed today's story. And if you do, please subscribe. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Bizzy. You guys, I say I'm excited so many times on my podcast, but today I'm not lying. I have been chasing Sheriff Mark Lamb since July. In July, he was on Sean Ryan's podcast. And when I watched him, I can tell you, tears were rolling down my eyes, rolling down my cheeks. And I was just in awe of him. And I am so happy to have you here. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning to you. I'm doing great. Sorry it's taken so long.
Oh my gosh. Well, we've had to go through so much since July. Think about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
so
know.
much.
Well, I was running a U.S. Senate race, trying to get through that. Didn't win the primary. Then we had to get through the general and make sure that we got President Trump across the line. And so, yeah, it's been a lot.
It's been a lot, but thank you so much for what you have done for us and our country. I can't thank you enough. I can't imagine going through another 4 years like we just went through. It was so dark.
Well, it was unsustainable. I mean, the damage is already very deep, but it was really unsustainable. What the path that we were on, and it's nice to see that quickly in 1 week we're already really starting to get a lot of things back on track.
It's so amazing. And are you helping Tom rile people up in
I
Arizona?
I was helping. We were doing a lot of coordinating with sheriffs prior to the inauguration.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm sure he is probably eyeballs deep in work right now, and so I'm here to help him if he needs help. But we were working hard trying to get sheriffs to the table, make sure that that the sheriffs understood how important role they would play in the work that needed to be done. So uh, Tom is a good man. He's the right guy for the job. You need somebody tough that's going to be able to withstand the pressure that the media is going to put on. Look, they're going to be watching every single step he takes. Any missteps, and they're already trying to make a big deal out of things, and they haven't even misstepped yet.
I mean, it's crazy. This media is just so disgusting. Okay, you guys, before I go on anymore, I'm going to tell you more about Sheriff Mark Lamb. He was born in Hawaii and has lived all over the world, spending time in the Philippines, Panama, Argentina, and eventually making his home in Arizona. Talk about a life full of adventure. Mark is not only the sheriff of Pinal County, where he's proudly been serving since 2017, but he's also a true patriot, a man of faith, and someone who believes in protecting and uplifting his community. Beyond his badge, he is an author, a public speaker, and even a TV personality. You might recognize him from shows like Live PD and 60 Days In. Mark recently took his passion for service to the next level by running for U.S. Senate in Arizona, showing his unwavering commitment to standing up for his beliefs and his community. But above all, Mark is a family man. He's a loving husband to Janelle and a proud dad who has faced life's ups and downs with courage and heart. Mark's story is one of resilience, faith, and service. And I know today it's going to inspire us all. So, Mark, it has like literally when I heard you, I want you to talk about, for one, you were born in Hawaii. So you spent time in Hawaii and Arizona.
No, just Hawaii. I mean, we were born and raised. I was there till I was 11. I mean, yeah, we would come back and visit because this is where a lot of our family was. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, we were raised in Hawaii, and back then, traveling wasn't as prolific as it is now. So it was a big deal when we did get to come back and visit. But for the most part, raised in Hawaii, we loved it. I was raised on the Big Island in Hilo, and honestly, it was a big part of our upbringing and helped kind of really toughen us up in a lot of ways because it's not easy to be raised as a little haole kid in Hawaii. But we didn't know any different. We were just Hawaiian kids, for all we thought.
It's so cool. That is so cool. And then were your parents missionaries, or what were they doing in Hawaii?
No, my dad was a graduate of Thunderbird, which is an international business school here in Arizona, probably one of the premier international business schools. So my dad just always loved international business, and he had lived in Brazil before getting married. And when we were all raised in Hawaii, then we moved to the Philippines, then we came back to Arizona, and then Panama, and then ultimately I was a missionary in Argentina. But yeah, we spent a lot of time all over the place, and my dad just loved being he loved being an expat outside of the country. So
It's so crazy because you're such a devout American. I mean, they call you the American sheriff, and your dad was a world like going out to seek the world, like Jacques Cousteau or something, right?
well, my dad was a big time patriot. My dad loved freedom, but my dad could see that the government with its fallacies, and we were raised with a healthy distrust for not believing everything that we were being fed. And I appreciate that. And my dad, having lived outside in so many different countries, instilled in us a very deep love for America and freedom. And I couldn't be more grateful for the upbringing we had, because it truly did. It deepened my love for America, because I've seen what the other side is. I've seen that, when you don't have freedom and when it's not America. I've seen that side of it. Well, as beautiful as some of these countries are, there's nothing like America out there. I mean, the freedom, even with as many struggles as we currently have, with all the problems with bad government, it is still the best place in the world.
Oh, I could not disagree. I absolutely am such a proud American and everything that we stand for. So you mentioned that you were a missionary. What made you become a missionary?
My two brothers were missionaries. I was the youngest of four kids. Everybody in my family, all my cousins were. We all went on missions. That's just the way it was. And I'll tell you, it's nothing better than taking from 19 to 21. Those are usually years you're either in college or floundering or trying to find yourself. I was thrown into another country, didn't speak the language, had to learn the language, and had to learn how to manage my own finances, had to learn how to be on my own. I was in Argentina in the time and day and age when you didn't call home. I think we called home twice. Mother's Day and Christmas were the only 2 days we could call home. The only communication you would have is letters. And back then, letters would take 4 weeks to get back to their destination, or somebody would write you and I'd get the letter like 3 4 weeks later. So you learn really quick how to be a big boy, and you got to learn how to deal with things on your own and communicate with people. I tell you, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. It was a great experience. And not to mention, I'm a very devout Christian. So just to be able to share my faith in God and Jesus Christ with other people was phenomenal. To me, those 2 years probably had more of an impact on my life than anything else.
Will you tell the story of when you saw
Mhm.
the man when you guys were walking across the street in Argentina? That hearing that when you were on Sean's show was just like so moving. Will you tell that
I,
story to
I
our
know
listeners?
I don't normally tell that story. Sean Ryan creates a great podcast environment, and it's just you and him, and you're in this room, and I just talked to a guy the other day that had just done Sean Ryan's show. We saw each other in Las Vegas at SHOT Show, and we talked about it. He goes, "Man, I just kind of blacked out." And he said, I told him, I said the same thing. I said, I don't even remember what I said. When my wife came and picked me up, she goes, "How did it go? What did you guys talk about?" I was like, I can't remember what we talked about. So I don't often tell that story. I will tell the story again, but I don't often tell it. I've actually had several podcasts since then that were like, "Will you tell it again?" And I'm like, nah. For me, it's a pretty special story, and it's something that really kind of just cemented in what already was a strong faith. I was a missionary in Argentina, and I'd been there for a while. I was training two missionaries. I had an American missionary and an Argentine missionary that I was training, which is normally not what you do. Usually, it's just two of you. There was three of us at the time, and we had a full day planned out, and the day wasn't going well. We just had not had much success. Every appointment we had canceled, and so it was probably 6 or 7 at night. The sun was going down, and we thought, you know what? Let's just go home. Let's just mail this day in. It's not good. I doubt it's going to get any better from here. And so we started kind of heading back to the place, and we stopped on a street corner. We were debating whether to go back to the apartment or whether we would stay out and just continue to work. And we were standing on this corner debating as we watched this old man shuffling very slowly across the street. And finally, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, should we help this guy? Should we not? I don't know. Finally, we decided, let's just help the guy. So we walked across, and just then he was trying to get up over the curb, and he couldn't get his feet high enough, and so he kind of started to trip. And we got there just as he was gonna fall, and we were able to catch him. And so we kind of stabilized this guy, and I mean, he's just in the grungiest clothes. You know how those when they're homeless, they just put more and more layers on, and that's how this was. And we couldn't see his face. He just had this long hair, long beard, and he had his head down, and we couldn't really see his face. And we were trying to talk to him, but all we could hear was mumbling. And so we were trying to figure out where he lived. And so the nearest thing we could do was go over to this kiosco. It's a kiosk, a little place where they sell like drinks and food, little food. They had them all over in Argentina. So we started moving towards that. Well, it takes us like 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes to walk probably 30 yards. I mean, it was not far, but he couldn't walk. So we're just holding this guy and shuffling along. And finally we get there. And now the sun had kind of gone down. And we're standing under the overhang of the kiosk. And we're asking the guy, hey, where does this guy live? And he says, oh, he lives right over there. And we said, well, what does he usually get when he's here? And he says, well, he usually gets milk and candles. And so we said, well, can you give us some milk and candles? And it was at that moment that I was standing there and the two guys were on the side of him. And then all of a sudden, we hadn't seen his face. And all of a sudden, he just looks up and he looks me directly in the eye. And it was no doubt that this was the face of Christ. Just straight into my eyes, didn't say a thing. We looked at each other for a few seconds, what seemed, just soul piercing. And then he put his head back down. And I looked at the two guys on the side of him, and we all three just could, that feeling of goosebumps, and you just, what an overwhelming feeling that came over all three of us. And we just looked at each other and thought, what did we just experience? And so we never saw his face again. We finally we're walking back, and we could kind of understand what he was saying is, who are you? And we said, look, we're just angels sent from God to take you home. So we take him back, and when we finally get to his place, he lives in this little tiny closet, no bigger than, it's like a closet you would have in your garage. And it was full of stuff, and he had a chair sitting there, and he had a table in front of the chair, and he had melted down candles and old milk bags, because milk came in a bag. And so we put the milk down for him. We put the candle down, and we left him. And we came back a few days later to check on him, but nobody was answering the door. And we asked these kids playing soccer out front. We said, hey, what happened to the old guy out front or that lives here? And they said, oh, that guy died 2 days ago or 3 days ago. He had died the night that we had brought him back home. So for us, this experience, not only was it an amazing experience, then it got even more when we realized, this was it. We had just, what we had done right before he had died and moved on to the next life. So it was a pretty amazing experience. One of those ones you just can't deny what you see, what you feel. And, from then on, it really, I mean, look, I've always been a very obedient and, well, obedient to God. I'm not the most obedient to government, but I'm obedient to God and what is right. And that really kind of just set a course for my life that just, I was already on that course that just cemented in that course.
It's so amazing because I think so many people just don't believe or they say, "Oh, it's a coincidence." I remember when I got sober, almost it'll be 19 years in August, God willing, and they'd say somebody gave me a book and it said God's little winks. And it showed me that God is everywhere, but like when I was in my active addiction, I couldn't see it, right? Everything was dark. I always relate it to like looking at an old stained glass window in an old church that's filled with soot and you can't see the light, but you know it's beautiful, right? But it's so filled with dirt. But when I got clean, the soot started to go away slowly and the light got to come through. And I think so many people have forgotten how beautiful God is and how Jesus is there. And
Yeah.
like what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania with President Trump, that was one day that I was like, oh my gosh, I was standing there, I was watching it, in real time. And first was when the American flag was twisted over and it looked like an angel. And then the shots came and how it just missed him. Like that to me definitely was God.
No question. I was fortunate enough to go to LA for election night. I didn't want to be here. I lost the Senate race and I wasn't a sore loser or anything, but I just didn't want to go to any particular election party. And I told my wife, I was like, I'm just going to sit at home. Well, the Fox Trace Gallagher show called and said, hey, would you come to LA and be in studio on election night? I said, perfect. So I grabbed the flight, flew out. I flew out to LA, sat in a hotel room until late that night. And we were on air when, not me personally, but the show was on air, and I was there at the studio when they announced that Trump had won the election. And so when I went and sat down with Trace to do the interview portion of it, he said to me on the break, he said, "Are you surprised by the results?" And I said, "No, I'm not surprised." I said, "I knew on July 13th, when God spared Trump from that bullet hitting him, that this election was gonna. There was more to this election than than normal." And I said, I knew at that moment he would win this election, and I was not surprised at all. I knew at that point this was a God thing, and I'm grateful that it was. Going back to that story and what happened to Trump. One thing about that story is since then, so many people have come up to me and they said, "Hey, I loved you on Sean Ryan, and I really loved you telling that story. It was the most memorable part of that whole entire 3 hours and something." It was like well over 3 hours. Um, he said but I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, look, I had a similar experience. And what it did, it made people feel like they could share their experience as well. And like I told you, I probably only have shared that experience even after Sean Ryan a couple more times since then. And so it's something special to me. I haven't shared it a ton, but what I noticed is it gave people courage to share their stories that they probably felt a little off about, like, well, people are going to think I'm weird, and look, I'm a truth speaker. I just tell what happened to me, and um that's it.
It's just so amazing. And I just saw yesterday actually a clip from Dr. Ben Carson was talking about George Washington back in the day. Did you see that clip where George Washington had been shot at 18 times by this Native American that he was like, I am the best marksman I know, and I know you should have been shot.
Yeah.
And that the Lord above is with you. And they
Well,
don't have that in history books, which I think is insane.
they do have it in some, and so I've known that story for a long time. And one of the things that the chief says at the very end, he says, "I need you to tease." About ready to die, and this is years later after they had tried to kill George Washington, shot at him. He had a bunch of holes in his coats. I think they shot 17 times. I think he shot, and it didn't, and nothing happened. So this old Indian chief wants to go meet President George Washington before he dies, and when he gets there, he said, "I had to shake the hand of the man that God would not let die." And that's the type of history that this country has. Look, this is a special country. It's had Christianity and religion in general have been able to flourish in this country because of God's hand over this country. I think you see it over and over and over again. Experiences like George Washington. 100 years from now, they may be telling the same story about President Trump, about how that bullet missed him and God spared him. This is This is a country full of stories that are so um, I mean, look, I can tell you stories. In one of my books, American Sheriff Rules to Live By, it's the second book I wrote. It's based on the poem by Rudyard Kipling, If. And I tell different stories for the different stanzas of the poem. And, I tell a story of of Daniel Boone and different people where there is clearly a God thing going on here.
Well, I think that definitely you have a God thing going on because your life hasn't been that easy, especially with your son Cooper. And can you talk about Cooper with us and what he was like and what happened with him?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you want to know?
So he was he was like me. He was an addict, right? He was an alcoholic, he was a drug addict, and he had a big road to hoe in that.
Yeah, so about the time when I was running for sheriff, look, there's always people don't realize the sacrifice that comes along when you try to climb up the ladder. I don't even want to say it's for running for public office. Anytime you climb the ladder in life and you try to better yourself, I promise you, it gets a little higher and scarier with every rung. And also comes along with sacrifice. Unfortunately, I had to spend a lot of time on the campaign trail. Then when I became sheriff, I was spending a lot of time as sheriff. My kids were all teenagers at the time, and so one of my kids, my middle child, um, that seemed to be when he kind of started going off the rails, and just a great kid, my most tender-hearted kid, wanted to help other people, always very conscientious, but also his own person. And he got off into the wrong path and started using drugs and really just kind of was falling away from never really fell away from us, but he was clearly had some real problems. A couple times the deputies had to call us. I mean, we would be so angry with them. We're like, don't you realize I'm the sheriff? Like, does that not compute in your head? Um, and so we just kept just trying to help him along. Well, we get a call one day, and we told him, you cannot drive our cars. You cannot be in our cars. No, you can't. So one day we get a phone call while we're out at a charity event, and it was my son telling me that he just hit a guy riding on a bike. He said, I picked up the phone. He said, Dad, I just hit a guy on a bike. So at that point, I can't tell you what happened because I was just, your brain just, and so we jump in the car, we drive over. It wasn't far from our house. And sure enough, we pull up and there's the car and he's standing outside the car. So we check on him and then I walk over to check on the guy and I'm just praying this guy doesn't die. He's laying off to the side. Paramedics are working on him. I walk back over to my son, and one of the hardest things, and I talk about this all the time when I talk about honor. One of the hardest things was I walked back up to my son and I looked at him and I said, um, I can't stay here. I have to leave. If I stay here, they're going to say that I influenced this case in some way. And I looked at him. I said, I'm sorry, but you're on your own. And my wife and I got in the car and we drove off. He was, I think, 18 or 19 at the time. So he was an adult. Wasn't anything I could do for him. And if anything, I was only going to screw it up for him if I did. And so I had to leave him surrounded by like 7 or 8 deputies and drove off. And eventually, he did get arrested, got charged. They took his blood. About 4 or 5, 6 months later, they found out that he had something in his blood, some type of like a Xanax, a fake Xanax or something. And so they charged him with ag assault with a deadly weapon. Um, but by about this time, he didn't quite clean up then. But then he had an experience where his girlfriend, we had gone on a family vacation to Alabama. We come back and her dad had rented a hotel room because of a fire. It's a long story, but nonetheless, he says, hey, I've got this hotel room. I can finally go back to the house. So if you guys want it for the night, I have it for one more night. So they go from here we get back from vacation. They go straight to the hotel. Later that afternoon, probably 4 or 5 in the afternoon, I get a call from the police department in that place. And what had happened was they got back to the hotel. His girlfriend, fiance, his girlfriend at the time, um, was in the bathroom and hadn't come out. So he goes to check on her. Well, she's overdosing. She's dying of a fentanyl poisoning right there in the bathroom of the hotel. So he drags her out of the bathroom, tries to put her on the bed. He's doing CPR. Well, he's trying to call the paramedics, but the phone wasn't working inside of the hotel. So he steps outside of the hotel room to get the hotel or to phone to work. Well, the door closes on him. And you know, these hotel rooms, when they close on him, they lock. And he's in a sheer panic, knowing that she's inside dying and he's outside. So the paramedics come, they have to kick down the door. So the police call me and tell me this. And they said, look, your son wasn't we don't know if he was under the influence, but she was. And that was it. I think that was the awakening moment for him where he realized, because they also found out shortly, either within days, that she was also pregnant. And so this changed the trajectory of both of their lives. We brought them back here to live with us. They both got clean, and they had been clean for a long time and they ended up having the baby. After they had the baby is when the long arm of the law, which is like a tail which swings around, you don't actually go to jail for a couple of years after you actually commit the crime. Well, he actually had to go to jail and ended up in my jail for 6 months. So I told him you should write a book called The Sheriff's Son, Surviving Fentanyl and My Dad's Jail. And so he ends up in jail. But by this time, he had had a job. He was clean. He was doing good. But that's where consequences are not always timed out right. And he ended up having to go to jail. And so he comes, spends his 6 months in there, which was very tough. You know, he called me crying a few times, begging me to alleviate how hard it was. And I had to tell him several times, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. If I do, it'll make it worse for you. People will treat you worse. You have to do your time just like they're doing it. It's the safest thing for you. And so he did end up doing his time, and I was proud of him. He paid his price and gets out in October. And it was December 16th. He had a job, everything was going well. I think they were going to get married right before Christmas. So in the next week, they were going to get married. And my granddaughter was 11 months old. Our daughter-in-law, they'd lived with us for years now. So she was like our daughter. She went to pick my son up from work, and we were home wrapping presents. My wife was wrapping presents. I had gone to a dinner. I'd done some Christmas shopping. I come back home, and probably about 30 minutes later, we're sitting here watching TV, and we get a knock at the door. And we go open the door, and my wife is like, why is Sheriff Penzone here? It's the sheriff from the neighboring county, and my chiefs were here. And I thought, no. So we put the dog up, we opened the door, and you could just tell something wasn't right. And one of my chiefs who's known my kids forever, just he couldn't even hardly. He was emotional, and he just looked at me and he just said, "Cooper and the baby are dead." And once again, you're just. I mean, everything. My wife's like, "What did they say? What did they say?" And it just, your life just changes in an instant. We had lost my 22-year-old son was killed by a guy driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. My 11-month-old granddaughter, they died on scene. My daughter-in-law, they were able to keep alive, but she was for the most part dead. But they kept her alive for another week, and then she died. So all three of them died in one accident on December 16th, 2022. So a couple of years ago. So that was a very, watching your son go through all that. Then he gets cleaned up. He finally gets out of the quicksand of the judicial system and addiction, only to lose his life to somebody who was driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs.
How have you and Janelle made it through? I mean, look at you. You're still a public servant. I'm sure you have forgiveness, which is like unheard of to me as a human. I mean, I think we all carry around these things like, I can't stand this person. I hate this person. I'm going to make sure that he goes to jail for the rest of his life, or somebody kills him or something like that. As humans, we want to cause pain to someone because they cause so much pain to us. And how have you gone on since then? Because I have so many viewers and so many people that listen to me that have children that are on fentanyl, that they don't know how to get them off. They don't know what to do. And you and Janelle didn't go and manipulate, like your son didn't manipulate you guys to be against each other. You guys stayed united as a united front. So many families fall apart because the mom's like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And the dad's like, no, we've got to be strong. And the marriages fall apart. So many things happen with our kids with addiction that pull, because it's such a family disease and people don't talk about that. They don't talk about how the entire his brothers, I'm sure, were affected. You know, your dogs are even affected because you're always worried, like, what is he going to do? And then he cleans up and this happens. I mean, it's so big, Sean. And it happens to, I mean, my Mark, and it, people don't know what to do, and they're so lost, and they're so alone, and they're so sad, they're so angry, they don't believe in God anymore. They have so much pain, and I don't know what to say to them because there's no answer.
You know, my wife asked my son when he got clean. My wife was like, what could we have done different? What could we have done to help you? What could we have done to kept you?" And he said, "Mom, there wasn't anything you were going to do. I was going to make my own choices." He goes, "But you did do something for me. You created a home for me to come back to when I was ready." And so you,
Mm,
I'm a freedom guy. You cannot control other people's freedom. You can't want freedom, but then want to control other people's freedom. And it's not easy. To watch people use their freedom in the wrong way is tough. I can only imagine how God feels watching all of us screw around and blunder this whole thing up. But he, my son had to make his own choices. And as hard as it was, what we always tried to do was just love him and be a place for him. We didn't condone it. We weren't we weren't we called him out on it, but we always gave him a place for love. So when he died, we had this guy that had been going. We go to church with him. Well, he was also assigned to work in the jail, and he had written something. My son had written something while in jail, and this guy says, "Hey, I think you should have this." So my wife read it at the funeral. But one of the things he says in there, he says, "Look, I would always tell my dad, I'll pay you back, or I'll do this or that," because when he hit the guy on the bike, we were going to get sued. We had to pay this guy money, which we didn't have money. We had to pay legal expenses. I mean, it just crushed us financially, and I don't think we still have come out of it. But we, I would always just tell him, and this is what he wrote. He goes, "My dad would always just say, Cooper, I just want you to do better." So I think all too often we're trying to control as parents. Parents fall away because where they lose the battle is not in whether their child gets off of fentanyl. The battle for them is to try to find that to maintain the love and to maintain that safe place for their children should they decide to make that change. And what we always asked them was just do better. Just do better. Fortunately, we were one of the few where he did get off of it. He did make a change and turned his life around. It's possible he wouldn't have. We expected to get the knock on the door many days, but not because he died in a car accident. We expected to get it because he died of a fentanyl poisoning. Those are what we expected. So we had let our guard down because now he's clean, he's doing good. Both of them were doing good. We let our guard down only to find out that they died from something else. So I don't have a ton of advice other than you're not going to be able to control what people do, and if you are, you're in the wrong. You know, as hard as it is to say that, every single one of us came to this earth to make our own decisions and our own choices. What we can do as parents is teach them, love them, provide them a place, a home to come back to, a safety net. That's it. Other than that, if you're impeding, or oftentimes you're hurting yourself, you're hurting them, and you're really going against what this purpose of this life is, which is to give people their own choice. So I fight for freedom. I'm a freedom fighter, and I fight for freedom against tyrannical people and governments. I fight for freedom on a daily basis, whether I agree with it or not. In this case, if you're a freedom fighter, you have to be able to say, I have to fight for their right to be free. And sometimes that freedom comes with really bad decisions and lives that we don't agree with. Um, some never really change. It
No.
ends up, but parents absorb too much of it, and we did too. But we were fortunate enough to still just kind of push through. And I told my wife that many times. I said, we can't control what he does. He is free to do what he wants to do, whether we condone it or not. We won't, we'll tell him, but we're not going to force him to do anything because you can't.
No. We try. We try and we try. And they still do what they want to do, right?
Yeah. Look, they're going to do what they're going to do. I know I'm not, that seems like a defeatist attitude. But it's really not. You just can't force people to do things. And unfortunately, when you do, um, usually that pushes them into certain type of behavior as well. So yeah, look, I just feel for every parent out there, which is why I'm still a strong opponent of fentanyl, and I'm an advocate for parents who are struggling for again with people struggling with their children or loved ones struggling with fentanyl poisonings. I mean, it's not just a young person thing, it's an older person thing, it's an every age thing, it's in every demographic, every financial status. Everybody's affected by it, which is why I'm very passionate about defeating fentanyl and other drugs.
Is this change of rebuilding the wall, which I see that they're actually working on 24/7, right? They have started back on the wall and they're working on it as we speak right now. Do you think that'll have a huge deterrent of keeping that fentanyl that's coming over the border off out of here?
Look, the wall is one piece of it. It's
Okay.
one piece of it. All of it together combined will have an effect. Yes, it will. When you have an open border, it's really easy for them to bring drugs across. You know, um, 50% of the drugs. This is one statistic that the government will tell you. The Cato Institute and other places will tell you that 90 something percent of the drugs that come across are coming through the ports of entry. That's just not true. The reason why is because if you really dig in, where they get their statistics from is CBP, Customs Border Protection. Well, if you know about Customs and Border Protection, there's Border Patrol, there's Customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection controls the ports. So, of course, 90 something percent of what they catch is at the ports because that's where they control. But if you take into consideration the statistics from HIDTA, which is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Administration, if that takes into local sheriffs, state troopers, border patrol, CBP, DEA, when you take all of those statistics, 50% of the drugs that come into this country are being caught outside of the ports and 50% at the ports of entry. So my point being is that you need all facets of border security if you're going to stop the flow of humans and drugs into this country. Will we ever stop it? No. But I mean, if we did, it'd be great. Unfortunately, I think there's too many people on the inside that are also undermining our country, um, uh, which is sad to say. But I think that there's always going to be some level of drugs. But let's not make it easy for them to get it. Fentanyl here at some points was as low as 25 cents a pill in Arizona. On
Ah,
the average, it's probably just a couple bucks a pill in Arizona. If you buy it in enough bulk, you can get it for 50 cents a pill still here in Arizona. So it increases the further it gets inland into the country. You go to North Dakota, it might be, $20, $50 a pill. Here it's $1, $2 a pill on the street. And if you buy it in bulk, probably down as low as 50 cents, maybe even lower. I don't know. But we cannot have that type of supply in this country, or else we're gonna always lose this battle. And so yes, the wall will matter. Border Patrol agents back patrolling the border will matter. Military currently on the border is going to matter. Increasing technology and using the technology that exists. A lot of the technology that we had at the border, they never even used, or they let it fall to where they weren't using it. Cameras, sensors, all of these things that they could have been using, they had zero desire to actually fix this problem.
Why do you think that was? What do you think was the darkness in this last administration? Like it's just it's I can't even there's no words for it. Like what they let go on. These kids 350,000 children are missing.
Well, there was about 140,000, 150,000 children, more or less, coming in per year, unaccompanied minors. 150,000. So you do the math over 4 years. The 350,000 you hear about, or the 300 plus thousand you hear about, are the children that came in. Then they took them and sent them to whatever address these kids had written on their arms or on a piece of paper or whatever, which oftentimes was right back into the hands of the cartels. But the 300 plus thousand are the kids that's not the total amount of kids. That's the amount of kids that they don't know where they're at. Like they haven't shown back up for any appointments. They're not answering phone calls. Maybe they're not at the house that they said they were going to be at. Um, and look, Border Patrol agents, CBP guys, they were saying, hey, look, the last group of kids we had all had the same address. Oh, no, no, just send them anyway. And part of that is because Border Patrol's mission is not to take care of kids. So they have to push them off to an organization that is supposed to take care of kids. Well, that organization was completely dropping the ball. It's just been a complete and utter disaster. Um, and then you talk about, we're only talking children now. I mean, how many women are being, abused? How many men are being extorted? I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of men and women that have been put into the sex trade or hard labor or being extorted for more money by the cartels. Children that are being used. The numbers are off the charts, and look, I thought it was incompetence or ignorance in the beginning, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt that maybe that's what it was. But I learned really quickly that this was very intentional, that they had no intentions of fixing the problem. And not only that, they were making decisions and doing things that actually were throwing gas on the problem.
I mean, do you think we can clean this up in 4 years?
Well, you really have to look at it into a 2 year increment, because in 2 years we'll have to go and the Congress is razor thin right now, and Congress could go back. Historically, it tends to shift away from the party of the president, and so we could end up losing Congress in 2 years, and then legislatively, you're not going to be able to do hardly anything, and you're going to have a body that controls a lot of the funding. So you have to look at it like, look, we have to make sure that we maintain the House and the Senate in 2 years, or we could fall back into some of this. Um, I think that President Trump is got 2 years with a line, everything lined up. Hopefully 4 years, but this is a lot of work to fix, and I love that they're already hitting the ground running and getting to work and sending a strong message. I think a lot of people will self-deport. I don't think they understand just the toll that this has had on our economy. Look at lost tax dollars, jobs taken away from Americans. How do you let 12 to 15 million people come into this country over the last 4 years? We don't have hardly enough housing for Americans, let alone to add another 12 to 15 million people into the market. You ask about why. I could give you a long list of things of why I think. I don't know that there's any one particular answer. I think there's a lot of the different reasons at play why they would just turn a blind eye to it, or intentionally open the borders.
It's crazy. So tell me this, what are your political aspirations moving forward?
I don't have any. I'm not a political guy. I mean, look, I was in politics because when I was a cop, I got into being a police officer late in life. I was 34 years old. I went on one ride along at 33, and I thought, I came home that morning and woke my wife up and I said, honey, I'm going to be a cop. And 6 months later, I was in the academy and on my way to being a cop. And when I became a police officer, I loved it because I could see the impact you were having in the community. But I also saw that there was really a lack of strong leadership in law enforcement. And I think COVID shows you exactly what I saw and felt, because how many leaders in law enforcement didn't stand up for the people? There was very few of us that were willing to speak out and say, no, we're not doing that. Was one of them. And but I knew that. I knew that most of these leaders were not leaders, they were supervisors. And so that's part of the reason I ran for sheriff. That, and politically, I thought we were on the wrong path. And I thought that we were turning the public on police officers and making police officers seem like we were somehow the bad guys. And so, being that I saw those two things, I decided to run for sheriff. So it wasn't that I was like, oh, I want to be a senator, I want to be this or that. No, I just was trying to solve two problems in an industry that I was in, and became the sheriff. And, a lot of times people would say, why do you have to be so political? And I said, no, I'm not being political. You guys are doing political things and forcing me to make a stand. And you now want to turn it on me and saying that I'm being political. No, I'm standing up for the people and I'm standing up for the Constitution. And you want to turn it around on me. And so I saw there was problems that on a federal level that needed to be fixed, and so I made the decision to run for the US Senate. This was hard because it was right after we lost our children, which actually was the big reason we were going to do it. I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to do it because I didn't want to drag my son through all of that whole thing again, where he hit the guy on the bike and he and I just got just roasted in the media. And for a long time, they really just trashed. They said the worst things to me. They said my wife. They said the worst things to my kids. And it was right when COVID was happening. So I was like just getting hammered. And I didn't want to drag my son back through that, which is why I probably wouldn't have run. When I lost my son, when the smoke cleared, my wife and I looked at each other and we said, we need to do this. And so it gave us purpose to push forward in what is a very difficult thing to do, which is run for a statewide office, U.S. Senate. Nonetheless, it is not easy. And so we worked really hard. And one of the things you sacrificed was I had to sacrifice my job as the sheriff. I couldn't run for both. So I had to pick one. Now, I didn't have to leave as sheriff. I could stay on and finish out my term, but I wasn't going to be the sheriff moving forward past December 31st. So that was one of the consequences of me making this decision to run for office. I didn't win the Senate, and I had to give up the sheriff's job on December 31st. And I'll tell you, being out of politics feels great. It feels great, and I don't know, man. It would probably take a lot of time. You'd have to have an army of people to probably drag me back into it.
Oh my gosh, but I think you would be so good because let's face it, Donald Trump isn't a politician either. He's a businessman. I mean, and look at we need people that know that speak the truth and tell you
But look
know
at
what
what,
it's like.
and I agree with you. Here's the difference. Um, Donald Trump has enough money, and look at what they tried to do to him.
Ugh.
Anybody else wouldn't have been able to withstand it because, for one, he's tough as nails. Like I always say, he's tougher than a $2 steak. Um, but he also had the financial means to be able to withstand the pressure. I always tell people, look, politics is a rich man's profession. If you are not wealthy, it is very difficult to run for office. And people always say, no, 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 we'll raise you the money. And I said, it's not what it is. You can raise the money, but you can't use that money to pay for your bills, your home, your car payments. That has to come from your job. So if you don't have a job, if you're running for office, how do you have a job? Either you have to be independently wealthy where you have a company that puts money in your bank account, whether you're there at work or not, or you have to have a ton of money in a trust fund, and then, like let's say governor pays $95,000 here in Arizona, $95,000. So you have to be wealthy just to live on that salary. People would say, well, 95,000 is a lot. That's not a lot when they take retirement out of your money, when they take insurance, and when you're constantly going to events and you have to have a whole wardrobe of clothes, you can't wear the same suit every day. Um, it gets really expensive to be in politics. And so I'm not in a financial position. I'm coming off of a career in law enforcement where you don't make a ton of money. Plus, I'm coming off of a 2 year, a year and a half U.S. statewide Senate race. Um, yeah, I'm not in a position to do it. That's the difference. Is there are people that have enough money that they can push through it. I hope to maybe be in that position one day to where if I decided to do it, I could. But I don't know that I could put my family back through it again.
Well, we never know what God has in store for us, right? So, what are you going to be doing now that you're footloose, kind of fancy free, which I doubt you are?
Well, I'm staying active in the things that I love to do. I'm still footloose and fancy free, but I'm staying active. I'm a workaholic, so I like work. That's kind of what I like to do. And so I'm working with a company called Fair. They're a 501c3 out of Washington, D.C. So they do great work. Anybody who wants to donate can. That's how they operate, is off of donations, but they are border and immigration. So they're about, border security, immigration. It's the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And I've become their law enforcement advisor. What we're doing is building our coalition of sheriffs. Now that we have a new administration, we're pushing for sheriffs to be more involved, helping the federal government achieve theirs, doing things like 287G, which is working with ICE. So we're working on a lot of that. We put a newsletter together, doing some podcasts. I'm also very, very, very active in mental health and substance abuse, fentanyl. I'm still right in there with reentry. I work with a doctor here where we're trying to get into these jails and help people at the earliest point possible. I've always believed that you've got to deliver a better product back to society than what I got as the sheriff. I get a product. It's struggling. It's alcohol. It's drugs. It's whatever. Mental health. My job is to try to make that product better and return it back into society. And so there's a lot of reentry process that goes into that. So I'm working with a company that does that. Staying involved in some other industries within the law enforcement spectrum. And so fortunately that pays better than being in law enforcement does. Um, but I look, I'm a patriot in the end. Can I tell you that I'll never end up in politics again? No, I can't tell you that because I can't stand to watch these people that run for office. It just drives me crazy. So yeah, I mean, I'm a glutton for punishment. I may end up back in it, but for now, I'm doing advising and consulting.
I love that. I love that. Well, we will put the link to get to FAIR on the description here. So if somebody wants to make a donation, the link will be right there and you can just
Yeah.
click it and make a donation right there. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. If you do decide, which I have a feeling you might, because we need somebody like you, Sheriff Mark Lamb, to help us in this country and getting things back to normal, what I call normal, and I love to use normal in air quotes, but it would be an honor to have you back and hopefully working somewhere in our government because I feel like you know more than a lot of people that are out there working for us right now. Let's be
Well,
honest.
I appreciate it. And, I don't know that I know anything more, but what I bring is common sense. I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist. You just need to have common sense and not be afraid of doing what's right. We have a saying in our household. I have a little company that I started for my son. It's called Fear Not, Do Right. And that's kind of always been our mantra is fear not, do right. And if I had a guy ask me and I know we're closing out the show, but I had a guy ask me along the campaign trail. He said, Sheriff, and it wasn't a question I was expecting. Do you need to ask me something?
No, I'm listening. I'm
Okay.
listening. I'm intently. No, you can go as long as you want to go. This is my own show. I can do whatever I want.
So he says to me, it was a question I wasn't expecting, but I knew the answer to it. And he asked me, he said, Sheriff, the old military veteran guy, he says, Sheriff, what does honor mean to you? And I was in this room of people. And, a lot of people think honor is putting the shopping cart back when nobody's looking, or if the cashier gives you too much money and change, you give it back. That's integrity. And I looked at him and I just, without a hesitation, I said, honor is doing what is right no matter what the consequence is. And
Mm.
unfortunately, we've lost the honor in this country of doing what is right, no matter what the consequence is. Are you willing to stand and be with thousands of people around you telling you you're wrong, but you know it's right? Are you willing to stand up for what is right? And unfortunately, we have lost honor, a lot of honor in this country. We need people that'll do what is right, but we also need people that'll just say the truth. You know, Jordan Peterson says that you have to have faith in the redeeming power of truth. So it's not that I'm the smartest guy or any of that, but I believe in truth and I believe in common sense, and people gravitate to that, and it's not anything special other than it's become special because it's become we have become a country where we have veered from truth and we have veered from common sense. And so when somebody is actually standing in front of us and speaking with common sense, we're like, I like this guy. This guy makes a lot of sense. But it's not that I'm not smarter than anybody. I'm just common sense.
Well, God gave you the voice to be able to speak and speak the truth, what is right and what is wrong. I mean, God gave us all of this, I think, intuitively inside of us when we're born. But society, in my opinion, they've been treating us with the social media. When social media came about, it just dumbed us down and dumbed us down. I just had a gentleman, a doctor from LA, on my show, and he was talking about how kids today don't even know how to open a book properly. They have no idea how you open a book, and you open it, you open the side from the left to the from the right to the left, and you read a book. They don't know how to do that today. Kids are just monkey see, monkey do. You have these big lips. I want these big lips. You get the implants. I want the implants. Nothing is about God. Nothing is about having your own thoughts, creativity. What happened to creativity and imagination?
It's gone. You know, everybody's following suit. And yeah, social media has been, you know, we do a lot of youth stuff. When as a sheriff, we did a lot of things with the youth, and social media was a big aspect. One of the classes we taught was about social media and just sexting and all the damages that it can cause. The good things too, like if you learn how to manage it, you know, never before have you been able to build a business the way you can now with social media. So like there's good and bad in everything, but I would say for our youth, it has been very destructive, and certainly impeded in their ability to learn some valuable lessons that I have learned from books. Like that's how, I mean, my education has been derived from books, and I think reading the classics and really just digging into some books is really where I think you grow. So
It's so crazy because this gentleman was telling me that when you take away a kid's tablet or the phone, if you take it away for an entire day, kids start to sweat, they start to shake, they start to get depressed. I was like, you're talking about somebody that's coming off of heroin. I
yeah.
mean, that's how addictive this stuff is.
Well, they've shown that the dopamine hits that you get from your phone, from social media, from likes, from all that stuff, is the equivalent of the dopamine hits you get from it. And look, we'll pick up our phone, and you have no need to, but you'll open it up and open up Instagram just out of habit, you know. And it's or any one of the other platforms. I don't want one platform to be mad at me: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, X, you know, any one of those. Um, and it's designed to do that. It's designed to give you those dopamine hits. It's the same physiological response that you would get from a substance you would put in your body.
But don't you think, as being in the police department, being the head of the police department, don't you think we need to have some rules for people? Because we don't. Some people don't know. Let's face it. Not everybody's really smart, and I'm not saying a lot of people are really dumb. I just think that we need perimeters. It's like like you're bowling. We know if you go in the alley, you're not going to hit a pin. What do people need to know? What are the parameters for your child? Like you're not going to be. It's illegal to drink, right, at 21. What do we need to do for our society, for the younger people, and give parents that tool that they can say, all right, well, guess what? I'm not allowed to give it to you more than 3 hours a day or whatever it is. I think that's something that would be pretty interesting to look into in the future.
So this is going to surprise you, but I don't think government is not the answer.
Okay, so
Government
what is it?
and government shouldn't set our moral compass. It's parenting. It's parenting. It's not the government giving kids phones and turning them loose on it or tablets. It's parents. It's it's people knowing what it is and giving it to them nonetheless. And so I think that we cannot continue to look to government to solve our problems. We have to solve these
Mm.
problems in society. And we should, as a society, say, hey, this is why it's not good. Parents should say, I'm not going to give my kid a phone until they're 21 or 18. I don't like government regulations. I will never look to government to solve a problem. I think society needs to be the ones to solve it. It's part of freedom. And so I think that we've got to do a better job as parents and society to say, no, we're not going to, well, I'm not going to give my kids this until, look, I don't, even if my kids drinking age is 21, I don't want my kids to drink at all. So I don't want them to do drugs at all. I don't want them to, driving. You got to wait till you're 16 to get a license. Why? Because you'll suck at driving probably before that. uh, but I don't need the government to tell me that. And I don't need the government to set my moral compass or tell me how to raise my children or tell me what I can and cannot do. I should have the ability to make those decisions. But I think parents need to step up as opposed to looking to the government to solve your problems.
Well, I agree. And I think it's kind of interesting. The Bible has so many testaments on what we should do as parents, right? And shows us examples of how to be a good person and how not to be a good person. I mean, Ben Shapiro, who I absolutely love, says the best self help book ever written was the Bible. And the Bible sales in the United States were up 22% in 2024, which is kind of crazy. So maybe people are finally waking up and realizing that there is a God and there is a way to navigate our children that maybe we don't need I'm glad that you said not our government, because I of course want somebody to come down and tell people like, hey, this is what you need to do, wake up, because I feel like
All right.
so many people today are asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. And we have those people. They're called parents.
Yeah.
And they're called family, and to pull family in and say, hey, look, you got to get off the phone, or you got to
Yeah.
do this, you got to do that. That's how problems used to be: homelessness, all those things. You go back to the Bible, there were tribes, and they took care of themselves. They helped lifted one another up. And what's happened now is we've looked to government to solve all of our problems. And so we just start to internalize and say, that's not my problem, and we don't look to help and bring one another up. Look at North Carolina; they were abandoned by the government, and really the only help they've gotten is from other people, and it was far more effective than what the government was going to do anyway. If really all we need is for government to get out of the way in most cases and let us fix our problems. But when we think there's somebody else out there fixing problems for us, we become to internalize and we stop being good contributors to society. And so, um, yeah, I liked Trump's thing the other day, President Trump, when he was at the press conference in LA. He said, look, get out of their way. These people, let them on their properties, let them clean their properties up, and let them start building. Stop impeding them with permit nonsense. These folks will fix their problem faster than government ever will. But government wants to control it, and they want to dictate who gets to do this or that, and permitting, and you can't go on your property, and it's not safe, and nonsense, malarkey. Let them on there and let them fix it.
And my last question is, what do you think of him getting rid of FEMA?
Well, I think FEMA's useless. First of all, I'm a states' rights guy. I think that the founding fathers did not establish for the federal government to fix everybody, to do all that. Each state should be taking care of their own problems. FEMA shouldn't really exist anyway. That money should be FEMA money is what's going to these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations that are really aiding and abetting in the trafficking of humans and drugs into this country, human beings, children, all of that stuff. Somebody's here at my house. My dog's barking. You talk about dogs. We ended up with my son's dog. It was his dog. And when they
Oh.
died, we ended up. Come here. So, FEMA, I'm good with FEMA going away. I think that the states should take care of their own problems.
I agree with you there 110%. All right, if you decide to run, you have to come back on my show and talk about it. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you. I swear you guys, I've been harassing him since July. I'm like, "Hello, hello, hello." And I'm finally glad I got to meet you. It was such a joy. God bless you and thank you and Janelle for all of you guys have done for our society, I think as a whole, because you being out there and being a face of the sheriffs has just been amazing. And you are an amazing example of a father and a husband. And I want to thank you so
Well, thank you
much.
so much. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure getting to know you too. Thank you.
Take,
God bless
thank,
everybody.
God bless. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks for listening to Conversations with Bizzy. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, if you could subscribe, that would mean the world to me. And follow me on all social media. And you can also get my newsletter every Friday morning into your inbox. Just go to elizabethchance.com and subscribe. Take care.